Potatoes, who doesn't love them? This is how to make the humble potato into 3 delicious dishes. We've got potato Dauphinoise to make you feel like you're skiing in the Alps, to mashed potato, to that humble roast potato for your Sunday roast. These things are banging. They're crispy and crunchy. This is creamy and delicious. And this, well, this just speaks for itself. Let's learn how to make these 3 great dishes. First off, of the 3 potatoes, we're gonna make mash. As you can see here, I've got 2 types of potato. This one is called an agria, and this one, they literally just call it a red potato here in New Zealand. I'm not really quite sure what, but I've got 2 types of potatoes, so hopefully maybe we can see a bit of a difference in them. One thing that you cannot tell with potatoes is actually how much sugar is in them, because what happens is when they get stored and when they get cold, the starch that's in there transfers into sugar. And the problem is when you have a potato that's really sugary is if you use it for, let's say, a roast potato, it's really hard to get it crisp because the sugar just burns. So if you've ever made a roast potato at home and it's ended up being not so crispy, it's probably because the potato was very sugary. And unfortunately, there's absolutely no way of telling. So what we're going to do, we'll do a little bit an experiment when it comes around to making the roasties, and we'll do 2 types of potatoes and see if we can see a difference. But for now, we're just going to get on with the mash. So I'm going to use the agria potato and let's get to it. The potatoes are peeled for the mash. Now, when you're making the mashed potato, I would say that the most important thing is to make sure that your potatoes are almost all cut into the same size, because you want them all to cook at the same time. And if you've got some that are really big and some that are really small, you're going to end up with the ones that are really small are going to disintegrate into nothing, and the ones that are really big are not going to cook through properly, which means you're going to end up with a lumpy mash. So it's really important to take the time to make sure that when you cut them as evenly as possible, so that we have the best chance for these potatoes to become creamy, not lumpy, and just great silky smooth mash. Also, as you can see here, these potatoes were all nearly the same kind of size. So I've turned them onto their side, I've cut it in half, and we go half again. And then we just cut them all into lumps. You have to remember that this corner of your potato is slightly rounded, so that one is going to be a slightly bigger chunk. Cut it slightly bigger, but then these guys, just like that, you know. So this is what I'm talking about. See, this one is very small and this one is very large. If you end up with lots and lots like this is going to turn to mush and this isn't going to be cooked. So that's why it's important to try and make them this as similar size as possible when you're cutting them, to prevent the lumps later on. This was just an example so you can see how important it is to cut them the same size. And see how these ones are much more even? That's what you want. You want an even size cut of potato to make sure we've got the best chance of it not being lumpy. Obviously, I'm not going to throw this away. I'm going to use it all in the mash too. So 1 or 2 bits might be a bit mushy, but that's all right. And once all the potatoes are cooked, we're going to put them into a pot with cold water and lots of salt to season. And then when I say you want to season them really well, you're much the same as when you're cooking pasta or when you're cooking a vegetable. You want to really make sure that there's lots of salt in that water, so that potatoes, while they're cooking, are also being seasoned. That way, at the end, you're not dealing with a bland potato in the first place. Probably a good 2 teaspoons of salt have gone into this, and it may seem like a lot, but you've got 3 potatoes in there. That's not too bad. And we're just going to then only have to add a little bit of salt at the end. So now that these are all in here, in the cold, we'll put them onto the stove and bring them to the boil and cook them until they're done. And they're probably going to take about 15 minutes. So mashed potato doesn't really take a very long time, but we're going to check them at maybe 10 minutes and see how they're doing. You don't want a crazy fast boil. It doesn't need to be really rapid, but also it does need to be ticking along. You know, if you're boiling them really fast, they have more chance of getting quite soft on the outside and not cooking in the middle. So a nice moderate tick over is what we're looking for, nothing too fast. And then we'll check them with the end of a knife and see if they're cooked or not. And then the most important part of mashed potato, apart from them being cut into the right size, is getting your milk and butter nice and hot and ready to add to them. But we'll do that when these are finished cooking. So here we have the potatoes for the mash, and they've been boiling for about 12 or 14 minutes on the stove. And if you stab it, give it a little shake, it will quite happily fall off. As you can see here, this is the smallest bit of potato, and see how it started to disintegrate on the edge, and this will have taken on a lot more water than the first piece that I just showed you to check. And you know, you end up with this, you're just going to end up with watery mash. That's why it's really important to make sure that you cut them as nearly all the same size as possible. So what we're going to do, we'll drain these off, and then just while they're fully draining of water, we're going to sit the colander on top of this, and then we will warm up the milk, the cream, and the butter, and then we can put it all together. And the potatoes will just sit like this for a few minutes while we heat up the butter and the milk, because we want to make sure that they're all hot when they go together. So for mashed potato, what you really want is it to just be really creamy and delicious. So to do that, you need to add lots of cream, milk and butter. And I couldn't tell you quantities, but you add as much as you wish. And I'm going to add probably, this is probably about 40 grams of butter. And what we're going to do, we're going to pop it in the pan. But again, if we just cut it up small, like this, in there, it's going to melt nice and fast. So I've got about 30 mils of milk and 30 mils of cream, maybe a little bit more cream because I've got a little bit more, and we're just going to warm that up on the stove until the butter's melted. So the butter has melted in the milk for the mash, and as you can see, these guys are still steaming hot. What is really important when you make mashed potato is that you do not let them get cold before you mash them. So we want to mash them nice and smooth, and then we're going to add the nice hot liquid, and we're going to season them and finish them off so we have creamy, yummy mashed potato. Now obviously you can do this in a number of ways. If you've got a moulie or maybe a ricer, amazing. You could even do it through a sieve, which is how we used to do it in the restaurants back in London. But this is home cooking, so I've gone for the age-old masher. And what you want to do, give it a good mash, and see how these are nice and dry from where I drained them over the in the colander. That's really important to make sure that they are dry, because again, if they're wet, you just end up with a gloopy mess quite quickly, because as you mash it, the kind of starch turns into a thick paste almost. So the drier the better. As little mashes as possible, but you just want to make sure you get all them large pieces broken up. And again, if we was in a restaurant, probably what we'd do is put this pan on the stove and add this warm stuff to make sure that it all stays warm. But they're both about the same temperature, and again, this is home cooking. So we're just going to pour it into one side, and we'll do little by little, because you may have a little bit too much liquid, you may not have enough. So it's better to add a little bit than add it all and there be too much. I think we could add probably just a little bit more. And then to finish it off, we need to season it. So we'll give it a little taste to see how seasoned the potatoes were from the salted water. See, the salt has done a really great job there. I would say that maybe we just need to add a little tiny bit, but not a lot. And some black pepper. I mean, if you had white, you can add white and you like the taste of it, but you know what? I love black pepper, and I just think it's delicious in there. And then the secret ingredient to a great mashed potato, nutmeg. We just want a tiny little sprinkle, and oh my God, this will change your potato game forever. It is honestly so delicious. Mix it all together. Give it a taste. Oh my God. Creamy, rich, delicious, tasty, yum, mash. That hint of nutmeg will blow your mind. Get some in there. Nice bit of salt, good bit of pepper, and a nice bit of butter and cream and milk. What more could you want? That is yum. Give it a try and let me know in the comment section down below how it goes. And now to the roast potatoes. So we do have a similar start as to the mashed potato to make a roast potato, but there is a slight difference. And what we're going to do here is a little experiment, because you know how I was saying how it's very difficult to tell if a potato is sugary or not, if them starches have converted to sugar, you know, by purely looking at the skin. So it's quite hard in the supermarket to work out whether it's going to be a great roastie or an average roastie. But what you can do is look at the supermarket where there's usually some kind of chart, and there will be maybe a little thing that says, okay, this potato is really good for baking. Sometimes it says it on the bags of potatoes. Just have a little look and work out if there is some kind of guide there. But again, you can't always know that they're going to be correct, because as potatoes get stored, that's when their starches turn to sugar. So you can't always tell. But we'll get these peeled and we're going to cook them in separate pots, but we'll roast them in the same tray and keep them separate. And then you might actually be able to see what I'm talking about, how some might go crisp and some might be sugary and might be burnt on the outside as opposed to have gone crisp. So what we'll do is we'll get these peeled, and then I've put on here a little R for the red potato and a little A for the agria potato, because you never know, guys, you might have been making roasties and just think, God, I'm crap at this, but it might actually have been the potato. What's that saying? A good workman always blames his tools, something like that. Anyway, let's get these peeled and have a look. So I've peeled these two potatoes. This is the red one and this is the agria. And I don't know whether you can actually see, but there is actually a slight color difference. And this white one, to me, I think this is going to be a little bit sugary, and I think it's not going to roast as well because of the type of, just the colour of it. See how this one is lovely, it's almost got like a golden yellow colour? That is great. I think that's going to turn into a really good roastie. But again, I might have it all wrong, but it would be great to see the difference. So these two are peeled, and then we kind of want to keep these quite nice and big. I might cut this one into 4. Oh. There's my red skin. I might cut this one into 4 and maybe this one just into 2. But what we're going to do is we're going to pop them in some water, cut up. I'm going to add a little bit of thyme and some garlic and some salt, and we're going to cook them for only about 5 minutes, because what we want to do is to start getting this, the sort of outer layer of the potato to start to cook, and then we can really ruffle it up in the colander and we get this like fluffy edge, and then we let them cool down a little and it becomes starchy, and then when you put them in the hot fat in the oven, they go super crisp. So we'll get these cut up, we'll get them in the pan, we'll add a little bit of the stuff, and we'll get these guys cooking. So that's them in the water, covered, and then like I said, I'm going to add 2 cloves of garlic to each pot and a few sprigs of thyme into the water, because then what this does is, as the water is cooking too, it infuses the flavour into them potatoes again, and it just makes for a really lovely taste. And what we'll do is when we strain them off and fluff them, we'll keep all that stuff in there and they can get roasted with that too. So it's just all this extra flavour, which is just going to be a delicious addition to your roast potatoes, and you won't ever want to do them any other way. And also some salt, so a teaspoon in there, a teaspoon. So we'll pop these guys onto the stove and start to get them cooking. We'll probably bring them up to the boil and turn them down a little to a simmer. And yeah, when they've cooked for only maybe 5 minutes, we'll take them off and we'll fluff them up and we'll see what they look like then. I would really love it if you guys could let me know in the comment section down below whether or not you're enjoying these kind of basic cooking lessons. They're really important to make your life a little bit easier, but also I don't want you to be scared by the kind of things that we're making here. They should be easy and simple. That's what this place is all about. So yeah, if you'd like more content like this, give me a like. Even better, I'd love a subscribe. And let me know in that comment section down below on what you guys want to learn, because I'm all about teaching you how to do it. That's what I just love. So our potatoes for the roasties have had about probably 5 minutes after they came to the boil on the stove. So these ones here, this is the red skinned ones, so we're going to tip them out. And what you want to do when you're making roast potatoes is when you tip them into here, we're going to take them and we're going to give them a ruffle in the colander. And as you can see, what starts to happen is they get this skin on the top of them. like this, where it's all started to break up. The potato itself isn't cooked, but they've got a nice little skin. And then what we want to do is we're going to let them cool down for probably 15 minutes before we put them in the oven to roast, so that this skin can kind of solidify again and make a really nice crunchy exterior. So these are the red ones. I'm going to pop them on the plate with the red skin. And then we're going to do the same. These are the agrias. So we'll tip them out. Give them a good ruffle. And as you can see on these ones, again, they've got that nice bit where it's started to cook on the outside and has created a little fluffy exterior. So we're just going to pop them on the plate as well with the skin so that we know which is which. And then after 10 minutes or so, we're going to pop them in a nice hot tray in the oven. While our roast potatoes are cooling down and getting that nice edge on them from getting cold, what we want to do is get a tray really hot and preheated ready for them. So we're going to get a tray. I'm going to put a good glug of oil on the bottom like that. Maybe this was a little bit much for all their for the potatoes that I've done, but you get the idea, because what you want to do is really want to make sure that they can kind of cook and fry while they're in the oven. So I'm going to put that in the oven at probably 190, and we're going to get that stinking hot before we add the potatoes to it to make the roasties, because the hotter it is, the better. You're going to have more chance of the potatoes sealing on the outside and just being super delicious. And so that can go into the oven and preheat. So these potatoes have had 10 minutes cooling down, and as you can see here, this is what I'm talking about, this like crust that appears on the edge, and that's what you want, because that's what's going to make potatoes really nice and crisp. So these are our two varieties here, and look, this one doesn't have nearly as much crust as this one. Both cooked for the same time, both cooked in the same way. I just reckon that these ones have probably got a lower sugar content than these ones. So we'll get them in the oven and we can see the result when they come out. So the oil's been in for about 10 or 15 minutes, heating up at like 190, and it's gonna be nice and hot. And so what we wanna do is pop these in the nice hot oil. And again, we're gonna keep them separate so that we know which is which. We'll put the little bit of skin on this side, and we're gonna go this one. As you can see, they're just starting to sizzle in that oil, and that's what we want. So we're gonna pop them in and cook them for about 40 minutes. See you soon. Here are the roasties. Here's our two agri potatoes, and here's our two red potatoes. And, you know, to be honest, you can see the difference. You know, these guys have a really hard, yummy exterior, and these guys, I don't know whether you can see that there. You know, we're missing a little bit. This is a little bit soft. It's not quite as crunchy. So these guys obviously did have a little bit of a higher sugar content, but still absolutely crunchy and good. But these agrias are the ones just crisp and delicious on the bottom. Now, if you don't want to make these and add them to your Sunday roast, I don't know who you are, but all the steps are important. Make sure you fluff them, make sure your oil is hot, and make sure you give them enough time in the oven, and you will always end up with a great result. And finally, we have Mr. Dauphinoise, the delicious French, creamy, wonderful, just like decadent gratin. Whatever you call it, it's the bomb. Dauphinoise is just so decadent, it's just so wonderful. And you know what, it's really great, like as a Sunday roast, instead of doing roast potatoes, in case you're not sure if they are sugary or not, this is a really good one to like do in the oven. You can cook it at the same time as the chicken, and it is just banging. Like, if you do it good and do it justice, this thing, like, people are just gonna be like, whoa, where did you learn to make this? And you know what? It's really simple. Every single one of these 3 potato dishes essentially has the exact same ingredients, and all we've done is done them in a slightly different way. So for this, we're going to do Dauphinoise. We're going to slice the potatoes really thin, and we're going to make the really creamy sauce to go on it. So what we're going to do, we'll get that on first because we need to warm that, we need to infuse the things into it, and then we can slice the potatoes up, get them in a tray, and as soon as that cream's ready, we pour it on the top and we put it in the oven. And then it's like, see you later, ready when you're done. So for them 4 potatoes, I would say, I mean, this is a 500 ml of cream. It seems silly not to use it all, so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to use the whole lot. So I'm just going to pour it in the pan, and we're going to add some cloves of garlic. Just cut them in half because then you can fish them out if you want to, or if you don't, then they are easy to spot and someone's not just going to bite into them. But probably by the time that they're finished, by the time the potatoes are finished cooking, they'll be nice and soft anyway. So we're just going to cut them up, or if you wanted, you could even slice them up like that, super fine, so that they kind of disintegrate into the cream. Your preference, whichever you like. So add them in there. All of this time, again, seems like a lot, but you know what? It's flavor, and it's just absolutely delicious. Like, I just love it to be really flavorful. There's no point in making this if it's not like packed full of flavor. And then we need to season this. So we're gonna do some salt and some pepper. And that's it, that's the cream. And what we're going to do, we're going to warm that up on the stove first of all, and then once it's come up, we then can turn it off and it can just rest, and we'll pour it on top of the potatoes when they're all sliced and ready to go. Just be careful though, when you put cream on the stove, if you're not watching it, this thing can boil over and make a massive fucking mess. So make sure you keep an eye on it, don't turn it on too high, and get all of them flavors working together. So we'll pop that on and we'll slice the potatoes. So I've got a nice tray here. This will probably be perfect for 4 or 5 potatoes. And then we're just gonna layer it up in here. We're gonna slice them all, layer them up, and we're gonna season in between each layer, which is really important because otherwise it will be bland. Very important to season in between the layers. Now, if you had a mandolin at home, great, watch your fingers, slice these nice and fine. But I know that not everyone has one in their kitchen, so we're just gonna slice them by hand and be very aware of keeping them nice and thin. Doesn't matter how long it takes you to do it, just make sure you get them nice and thin, because then they will cook quicker, and again, much like the mash, you're not gonna have to worry about some of them being cooked and some of them not being cooked. So really take your time and just make sure that you concentrate on doing it, getting them as even as possible. Hey, if you do them really thick, do them all really thick. Don't do some thick and some thin. That's what this is all about, you know, you've got to keep it consistent. So let's get these sliced and we'll add them in. Now, obviously, I've been using a knife for a very long time, so I can cut them nice and thin. But this is a great way to, you know, brush up on your knife skills. Just be slower when you do it. You don't have to do it fast. We're in no rush. We'll just get that going. Give them a little wash. So when you're slicing them, you know, just start off at the end and use, see here, I have my knife and my finger. I'm using my finger as my guide to how thick I'm cutting the potato. So each time I'm just moving it along slightly so that I can get a distance. But make sure that you fold it down. So you don't want it sticking out like this, you want it folded under, and you're just gonna slice away. As you get to the end, I'm using this finger to balance. I'm kind of gripping it with my fingers and just be very gentle. We don't want to lose any digits. So all your potatoes are sliced, and now this is where it becomes really important. I mean, you can just pile them in, but to get the best result, you need to layer them up, and we're going to season between each layer. This is what we used to do in restaurants, and that's why it always tastes so great when you go out and eat it. So let's get it going. You can take a whole bunch in your hand and just slide them along like this. It's So we've got one layer in, and now salt and pepper, like that, each layer. Next layer, salt and pepper. You may think that it looks excessive, but I promise you it just makes such a difference between the layers, seasoning them with salt and pepper. You'll just notice such a difference. Salt is the best ingredient. And when you're putting them in too as well, you want to try, you know, just give them a little push down and make sure that they are all level. You kind of don't want edges like this and the middle being piled up, because then the middle is going to take much longer to cook than the edge. So always trying to keep them nice and level is really important. More salt, more pepper. And then for your last layer, make it look nice and pretty. Oh, I hope I have enough potatoes for this. And then down the middle. Oh, absolutely perfect. Can just squidge these guys in here. Be silly to leave these out. Slide that under there. And so you've got your last layer there, and again, salt and pepper. And it's nice to do it in a dish where you do have a little bit of space, because then if it boils up, it's okay, and you'll just get this really lovely crunchy edge. So we'll grab the cream, it's come to the boil, and we're just going to pour it over the top. So here's the cream. It's all nice and hot and has infused the garlic and the thyme and the salt and pepper. And what we want to do before we add it to this is just give it a little taste to make sure that the salt and pepper's right. Now I've just tasted that and it needs some more salt. You want to make sure that it tastes nice, because currently it just tastes like cream, you know, with a little bit of garlic and thyme in there. So you do always need to make sure you give it a little taste and add a little bit more salt and pepper if needed. Side note, incredibly humid here today, and I feel a bit like Monica from Friends when her hair is getting bigger and bigger in the Caribbean. We'll see what it's like by the end of the video, shall we? Anyway, let's get back to them potatoes. You also may be thinking, but Del, there's so much salt and pepper already in here. That salt and pepper is for the potatoes. This is for the sauce. So they are two separate entities, even though they're all going to go together. So you need to make sure that the salt you need to make sure that this is seasoned correctly also. And we'll just give it another little taste. Yeah, and that's much better. It tastes a lot nicer, just with that little bit of extra salt in there. Now that that's all done, we'll just pour it on. All them lovely bits on top. Get them cloves of garlic under the potatoes. And the thyme, it's just going to be lovely. It's going to cook on top and be a lovely cute little garnish. And yeah, that's it. We're going to put it in the oven at 180 for probably 45, maybe an hour, because we need to make sure that the potatoes are cooked the whole way through. But that's it. Simple as. It's not maybe so traditional, but you could put a whole layer of Parmesan on the top so you get like a cheesy top to it. But I like to just keep it like this. And also, what's another really good idea when you put this into the oven is to sit it on another tray, because this cream could bubble up a little bit, and the last thing you want to do is get it all over the bottom of your oven and having to clean that up. So a really good thing to do is sit it on a tray, and then there's no chance of that mess going all over the oven. What we will do though, at about 40 minutes, we will give it a check, because if it's starting to get too brown on top, we might want to cover it up with some foil, but we'll just see how it goes. So that's it. In it goes, and we'll see you soon, mate. And there you go, potato dauphinoise. So it's been in for an hour and a half. So I originally said about 40 minutes and we'd check it. And at that point, there was still a lot of resistance in the potatoes. So let's just give it a little check now. And just like that. You know, your knife goes straight through all the potatoes. If there was any resistance, I'd put it back in for another 20 minutes, you know, because there is nothing worse than a crunchy Dauphinoise potato. So make sure you have the patience to keep it in the oven that little bit longer. And this is the result you'll get. Something insanely delicious, bubbling, that cream has reduced, the potatoes have cooked, and it's just ready to go with whatever meal you're going to eat. And there we go. That is how you make these 3 delicious potato dishes. Simple, easy, and the hardest part is probably peeling the potato. It's just about being patient, checking to see whether they are or are not cooked, and just putting a bit of love in them. These guys, honestly, just what more could you ask for? Let's give them all a taste. We've got that delicious creamy mash. We've got a nice crisp, crunchy roast potato. And as you can see, this one, super fluffy in the middle. This guy was the agria. He was the one that I think was less sugary. This is the one, yeah, this is the one that probably had more sugar in it. Definitely not as crumbly in the middle, or as crunchy on the outside, but still delicious. And then this guy. I've actually had to let him cool down because honestly this thing, you saw it come out the oven, it was a bubbling beauty. So now it's chilled a little bit. Chilled. It's been out the oven for 5 minutes. Let's give it a little taste, shall we? Oh my God. Honestly, it transports me all the way back to Europe. This thing is decadent and rich, but what a treat. What a treat. And as you can see now, not so hard to make. I really would love it if you guys could let me know how it goes in the comment section down below. And like, give it a go. This thing is like so good to do. You just gotta make sure you keep it in the oven for long enough. Anyway, I'm off to probably eat some of this with my dinner, and I'll see you next week. Ciao guys.